The moment 9-year-old Tyler Matthews walked onto the voice stage with his mother Sarah, something heartbreaking filled the air. Not because of his appearance, though his nervous fidgeting and the way he kept his eyes down were noticeable under the bright studio lights, but because of the weight of silence that seemed to surround him, as if speaking itself had become his greatest enemy. What nobody in that studio knew was that Tyler's beautiful singing voice masked a daily battle with severe stuttering that had turned simple conversations into moments of humiliation and pain. Subscribe now, because what happens next will show you the true power of believing in yourself when the world makes you feel invisible. Tyler had been diagnosed with developmental stuttering when he was 4 years old, after his speech difficulties became so pronounced that other children began to notice and comment. What started as occasional word repetitions had evolved into a condition that made ordering food, answering questions in class, or even saying his own name a source of anxiety and embarrassment. At school, Tyler had become known as the kid who can't talk right. During morning roll call, he would dread hearing his name called, knowing that his response would likely trigger snickers from classmates who didn't understand that his stuttering wasn't a choice or a sign of nervousness. It was a neurological condition that made fluent speech incredibly difficult. Since that stuttering Tyler had become his unofficial nickname among the crueler kids in his class, they would imitate his speech patterns during recess, elongate their words mockingly when he tried to join conversations, and sometimes simply ignore him entirely when he attempted to speak, claiming they didn't have time to wait for him to finish. But Sarah had discovered something remarkable about her son. While Tyler struggled terribly with spoken words, when he sang, his voice flowed clearly and beautifully. Music seemed to bypass whatever neurological pathways were causing his stuttering, allowing him to express himself with confidence and clarity that disappeared the moment he tried to speak normally. Tyler's music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been the first person to suggest that Tyler audition for The Voice. "When Tyler sings, you'd never know he has any speech difficulties," she had told Sarah. "His voice is pure, confident, and emotionally mature. Music might be his way of showing the world who he really is inside." Standing on the voice stage now, Tyler felt the familiar anxiety that came with knowing he would eventually have to speak, have to face the struggle of getting words out while millions of people watched. But he also felt the anticipation that came with knowing he would get to sing, to experience those precious moments when his voice worked perfectly. Blake Shelton, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan sat in their red chairs with their backs turned, ready to judge Tyler solely on his vocal ability. None of them knew about his daily battle with words, about the tears he shed when classmates mocked his speech, about the way he practiced introducing himself in the mirror every morning, hoping that today would be the day the words came easily. Tyler stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembling slightly as he prepared to sing "Count on Me" by Bruno Mars, a song about friendship and support that held special meaning for him because it represented everything he wished he could find at school: acceptance, understanding, people who wouldn't judge him for being different. When Tyler began to sing, something magical happened. His voice emerged clear, strong, and absolutely fluent, carrying an emotional depth that seemed impossible from someone so young. Every word was perfectly articulated, every phrase flowed seamlessly into the next, demonstrating not just musical ability, but complete command of language. "If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'll sail the world to find you." As Tyler sang, his entire presence changed. The nervous, withdrawn child disappeared, replaced by a confident performer who owned every word, every melody, every moment. His voice soared through the lyrics without hesitation, showing not just vocal skill, but a mastery of expression that contradicted everything about his daily struggle with speech. All four coaches hit their buttons during the performance, turning their chairs to see this remarkable young voice. Blake was already smiling, impressed by Tyler's technical skill and emotional maturity. The other coaches were equally amazed by what they were hearing. When Tyler finished, the applause was thunderous. He stood at the microphone, beaming with pride and accomplishment, knowing he had just delivered one of the best performances of his young life. "Tyler, that was incredible!" Blake called out enthusiastically. "How long have you been singing like that? Tell us about yourself, buddy." The moment Blake asked Tyler to speak, everything changed. Tyler's confident stage presence evaporated, replaced by the familiar look of panic that came with having to form words under pressure. He approached the microphone, his face already showing the strain of preparing for what he knew would be a struggle. Thank you," Tyler began, his face contorting with effort as he tried to push the words past the neurological barrier that made speech such a challenge. "I'm 9 years old and I love to sing." The audience fell silent as they witnessed the stark contrast between Tyler's perfect singing voice and his severely impacted speech. Blake's expression immediately softened as he realized what Tyler was experiencing. "That's great, Tyler," Blake said gently, his voice filled with understanding. "You've got an amazing voice. How does it feel when you sing compared to when you speak?" Tyler's eyes filled with tears as he tried to answer, the question requiring him to explain something that was both his greatest joy and his deepest source of pain. When I sing, the words come easy," he managed to get out, "but when I talk..." He couldn't finish the sentence, becoming stuck on the T sound and growing increasingly frustrated with himself. The harder he tried to force the words out, the more his stuttering intensified. Kelly Clarkson, recognizing Tyler's distress, called out gently, "Tyler, your singing voice is absolutely perfect. You have a real gift." But Tyler was now crying, overwhelmed by the familiar shame that came with his speech difficulties being exposed in front of so many people. "Kids at school laugh at me," he managed to say through his tears. "They call me stupid because I can't talk right." The words hit Blake like a physical blow. This talented, sensitive child was being bullied and humiliated because of a condition he couldn't control, made to feel worthless because his brain processed speech differently than his peers. Without hesitation, Blake was out of his chair and walking toward the stage, his heart breaking for this young performer who had just shared something so vulnerable and painful. "Tyler," Blake said as he reached the stage, "can I come up there and talk with you?" Tyler nodded, grateful for Blake's gentle approach. Blake climbed onto the stage and knelt down so he was at Tyler's eye level, understanding that this conversation needed to happen with respect and equality. "Tyler, look at me," Blake said softly but firmly. "Those kids who laugh at you, they don't understand what they're seeing. You're not stupid. You're one of the smartest, most talented kids I've ever met. Your brain just works differently when it comes to speech, but when it comes to music, your brain is absolutely perfect." Tyler wiped his eyes, looking at Blake with hope and desperation. Why can't I talk like everyone else?" he asked, his voice small and broken. "Because you're special," Blake replied without hesitation. "Because your voice, your singing voice, is a gift that most people don't have. You can take feelings and turn them into something so beautiful that it makes grown-ups cry happy tears." Blake stood up and addressed the audience and the other coaches. "Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler just taught us something important. He showed us that there are different ways to have a voice, different ways to communicate. When Tyler sings, he's showing us his real voice, the one that matters most." Blake looked back down at Tyler. "And those kids at school who make fun of you, they're just scared because they don't understand that being different is actually being special. They wish they had what you have, the ability to touch people's hearts through music." Tyler was still crying, but now his tears seemed to be a mixture of sadness and relief. Really?" he whispered. "Really," Blake confirmed. "And I want to make you a promise, Tyler. Every time you feel sad because words are hard, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you sang on this stage, that hundreds of people applauded for you, that your voice made people happy." John Legend, who had been watching from his chair, called out, "Tyler, Some of the greatest singers in history have overcome speech difficulties. Your stutter doesn't define your limitations. Your talent defines your possibilities. Niall added, Tyler, you just proved that when you have something important to say, you'll find a way to say it, and music is your way. Blake extended his hand to Tyler. Tyler, I want you on Team Blake, not because I feel sorry for you, but because you're genuinely talented and because I want to help you understand that your differences make you stronger, not weaker. Tyler looked at Blake's hand, then up at his face, seeing only acceptance and belief. Really? You want me? I want you exactly the way you are, Blake said firmly. Stutter and all, because it's part of what makes you who you are, and who you are is pretty amazing. Tyler took Blake's hand, and for the first time since he'd started speaking, he managed a clear, confident word. Yes. Blake smiled and lifted Tyler's hand in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Matthews, Team Blake. The applause was deafening, but more importantly, Tyler was smiling through his tears, looking like a weight had been lifted from his small shoulders. Tyler, Blake said as the applause died down, I want you to remember something. Your stutter is not something to be ashamed of. It's part of your story, and your story is going to inspire other kids who feel different, who feel like they don't fit in. Sarah, Tyler's mother, was crying in the wings, overwhelmed by Blake's compassionate response to her son's vulnerability. The segment became one of the Voice's most moving moments, shared widely as an example of how differences in communication don't diminish someone's worth or potential. Speech therapists use the clip to help other children understand that stuttering doesn't reflect intelligence or ability. Tyler's appearance sparked conversations about bullying, about supporting children with speech differences, and about the power of music to provide alternative pathways for self-expression and confidence building. Blake learned something that day that changed his understanding of courage. Tyler taught me that real bravery isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up and sharing your gifts even when you know people might judge you. That kid has more courage in his little finger than most adults have in their whole body, because sometimes the most powerful voices belong to those who struggle most to find their words. Sometimes the greatest performances come from those who've learned that there are many ways to communicate and all of them are valid. And sometimes a 9-year-old boy who stutters can teach an entire television studio that our differences aren't obstacles to overcome, they're gifts that make us irreplaceable.